Well, hello everybody. Thanks for joining me. Sorry to keep you late. Let me know if the sound is okay, and I will get talking. I just want to make sure I'm not on mute and all of that. So I haven't streamed in a while, so just in case I'm effing it up, give me a word in the chat if I'm coming through okay, and I'll get started. Cool. So yeah, thanks for joining me. I was kind of sitting here the last couple of minutes delaying going live because I was kind of nervous, to be honest. I haven't streamed like this in a while. I've done guest collabs with people and I've done live streams on the street, but this kind of stuff I used to do a lot of it is sort of strange. I see Last True Gale is in the chat there. He does Telegram voice chat, so he'll kind of know the feeling a bit. But it's even more acute. I see Emmanuel Godson there as well. How's it going, buddy? Yeah, it's more acute when you're face out. You're kind of thinking, especially when you're not familiar, when you're not like a nightly streamer, which I haven't been in a while. You start looking at the go live button, wondering to yourself if you're going to go live and have an Anchorman moment and just kind of spaz out on screen and have nothing to say, nothing comes to mind. But I think we'll be okay. So I want to talk about the referendum results. Now, as a preface, I'm celebratory about it, but of course I have mixed views on it, so in one sense it's a very good thing. In another sense, there's skepticism about it as well. So it's not just a big party about all of it. I have mixed feelings about it. Clearly it's a good thing in general. So yeah, I suppose I'll get into it. Let me start with a quick readout just from BBC, just a basic about the referendum if you're not familiar. So I'll just read from the BBC here. Voters in the Republic of Ireland have overwhelmingly voted against amending the Irish Constitution. Proposals to alter the wording in the Constitution to include families which are not based on marriage were defeated with 67% voting no. A second proposal change on the wording around the role of women in the home was defeated by a higher margin, with 73.9% of voters rejecting it. It was the highest ever no percentage in an Irish referendum. So basically, again, most of you know, but for those who don't, it sort of came out of nowhere in a way. It was based in this thing called the Constitutional Convention, which was set up in 2012 to consider possible changes to the Constitution. And there were a list of different things on the menu, basically. Now, it's somewhat of a mystery how these things actually work. I don't think many people really know, but it's supposedly an assembly of civil society and random people from the electorate and other vested kind of interest groups who come together and formulate these referenda or proposed referenda. And yeah, so this was kind of set up mysteriously, back in the day. So more than 10 years ago now, there was the gay marriage referendum. There was the Eighth Amendment referendum, yeah, otherwise known as Citizens Assembly, or those two things are more or less the same, similar things. Allegedly a democratic process to go to the people and see what they want or whatever. But of course, it's a big sham. It's a big charade, realistically. If we're being honest, right? Because just like any other sort of regime, they will decide what you get to vote on and what you don't get to vote on. And yeah, so gay marriage, this, that, the other, and this was included too. A big part of it was altering the idea of women in the home. So the concept that women should be in the home was the allegation from the liberal establishment, that the Constitution infers or implies, although not specific about it, that it implies that a woman's place is in the home. At least that was the allegation from the establishment, and that's what they tried to make the referendum out to be. Now, the challenge, of course, from the no side, the people who wanted to reject altering the words in the Constitution, was that it doesn't necessarily say a woman's place is in the home. It's just that the state should. I really should have the wording of the actual Constitution here, but I don't. But effectively, the Constitution said that a woman should not, by economic necessity, have to neglect her duties in the home, effectively, as a mother and as a caregiver, etc. So, yeah, the argument was had. It was done very well by. There were 4 people I listed out in specific whose arguments spoke strongly to me, and I think carried a lot of weight. And also because they were all women, it carried an extra sort of gravity to it. They were Una McGurk was one. She is a legal professional. She made a very good video, maybe like a 15-20 minute long video, um, putting an argument forth. You had Maria Stein, probably one of the biggest proponents against this constitutional change. She was on the television debating the Taoiseach, Micheál Martin, made some very good arguments. I actually thought she was, and but by the way, she's an excellently spoken person. She, I'm just getting distracted by this chat here. But someone's saying, never noticed how red your beard is. I know, yeah. It's actually the light as well. But so Maria Stein made a very good presentation on RTE. I think she totally defeated Micheál Martin on it. But one of the things that I thought was a pity is that she brought up the tax regularization or individualization. I'm not sure the details of it exactly, but it was a certain tax change that she referred to that happened in the year 2000, and it effectively drove women into the workplace by this kind of sort of economic incentive. Basically, adjusted. This is what I'm gathering from what she said. Adjusted the tax system so that it made more sense to for women to go to work than stay at home. I actually remember that when I was growing up, it felt like I was born in 91, it felt like a lot of women when I was around the age of 10, looking back on it in hindsight, got jobs and went to work. And before that age, or before that, it felt like a lot of mothers were at home where I grew up, more or less, like a decent number. Maybe they were very professional, kind of like upper middle class families who were like both parents were doctors and they had nannies, and that was kind of normal for them. But for the most of us, mum was usually at home. And then after that, it seemed like everybody's mother had a job and was working. Now, at the time, I assumed it was just my age. I assumed just because I had crossed a certain age that my friends and their or that my friends had gotten old enough so that their mothers could abandon, or not abandon, but kind of get over their child rearing duties, because we were big enough to be at home by ourselves and that kind of thing. So I had this sort of almost like a narcissistic or narrow-minded view of it at the age. I thought, oh, it's just because we're of a certain age, things are changing for us. This must always be how it is. But I don't think, looking back, I think it might have been that change in tax structure that made it so that it made sense for women to go out to work if they could at all get away with it. But sorry, not Una McGurk. Maria Steen brought that up, and she was about to go into sort of a spiel on that, and she was cut off by the presenter. Now, it might have just been time considerations, or it could have been someone in the ear saying, "Shut that down." I don't know. But if you look back on the clip, Maria Steen tried to get into that. She tried to cut across the presenter, tried to stick to the point and say, no, let me say this. And she was cut off strongly, and she just had to let it go. But she was about to make that point that basically Irish families were forced almost overnight by incentive and necessity to um to go to work, because we all know in the 80s and 90s there were bus drivers who had a 3-bedroom house, wife at home, 3 or 4 kids, and they were getting on just fine. And then of course that changed. That was commonplace in the 80s and 90s, and somewhere after that things drastically changed, where effectively most families at least felt like they needed to both work to either keep up with the Joneses or just keep up with the bills. So that was a very interesting point, and she was about to get into it, but alas, she didn't get a chance. After that, we have Jenna London, who I consider her one of the most important people in the sort of dissident counter-establishment space at the moment. Is it right wing? Is it dissident right? Is it whatever you want to call it? Anti-regime kind of space, political space. I consider her to be one of the most important people, extremely impressive in her presentation, how she speaks, her attitude towards what her understanding of how to intuitive understanding of how to reject negative framing, on how to come across as positive, to stick to her guns, and always maintain a certain level of dignity. And I just think it's her dignity and sort of her cogence and all of that is undeniable. She cannot be chalked up as a some sort of radical fringe lunatic or some sort of negative personality type. Like that is the last thing you could put on her, right? And that's what makes her so powerful, I think. But what also makes her powerful is her reluctance to cut or sort of cut the strings behind her or pull up the drawbridge behind her and say, okay, I have political clout now, I have political capital just in by virtue of who I am, and her energy, um and her the inability of the regime to deny her, and yet her lack of willingness to cut everybody else off. So to say, oh well, okay, now I'm the counter-establishment figure, but I can't. Anyone else is too far right or too far this or too inappropriate or whatever. She doesn't really do that, as far as I can see. She doesn't react to the gatekeeping game, and so she's got a toe in both camps and a sort of power in that. And I see a lot of people, including I've forgotten his name. Michael McDowell, Genie. How could I forget his name? He's a big part of. I'll be referring to him a few more times, I'd say. Yeah, that came up with Michael McDowell today. Anyway, look, I'm rambling, but I suppose I want to keep a bit of structure here and try to take it step by step. So anyway, so that's how what I was trying to say was that is how the referendum came to pass. That it was effectively in the works for a decade or more. It had been set by this nebulous process of democratic reference to the people, through civil society and blah blah blah, all that BS. But my take on it all along was that who's asking for this? Like, is anybody really asking? Is anybody losing sleep because of this constitutional line about women in the home, this, that, and the other, so called? Obviously not. One of the arguments from the presenter and from Micheál Martin when Maria Stein was debating, I was going to say them, but him at least, was that this kind of anecdotal stuff like, oh, well, my friend has a son, or no, my friend has a daughter and she's 4 years old, and is she to believe that her place is in the home and all of this kind of stuff? And I just thought, are you really telling me that like children are losing sleep at night because there's this 41.1.2 article in the Constitution that doesn't even reference women in the home? It just makes a sort of a sideways nod to that women shouldn't by necessity be forced to work to the neglect of their role in the home as mothers. It's completely ridiculous. And also, as Maria Steen noted, it's not been in effect anyway. As I think what she was getting at is that she, or what she was getting at was that it's been steamrolled anyway. Like that tax individualization of the year 2000 sort of in effect was not constitutional. A million different things in going on in the state at the moment, economically and culturally, mainly economically through tax policy and various financial instruments, could be described as unconstitutional if you were to really take that article seriously. But of course, nobody does. So it's moot. It's redundant anyway, unfortunately. So, um, why even bother? You know, that's how I felt about this these referenda. And by the way, it's late to say it, but uh, when this first came up, when I first heard about this like a year ago, these proposed referendums, I don't know, getting sick of trying to figure out which one of those words to say, but it always struck me that they were going to lose. To me, it seemed like redundant and annoying, just based on that it would get rejected. That the population would the voting population would say, you know, I'm sick of these referenda that have no relevance to my life. There was one in 2018, if I'm not mistaken, on blasphemy law. I can get back to that, but you know, increasingly irrelevant referendums. So referenda. Okay, that's really bothering me now because I know which one is which, but I'm losing it as I speak. Uh, yeah, so I just felt like that's one reason, because people are just sick of it. So completely, regardless of substance, people would just reject it out of referendum fatigue. Secondly, there's intense political correctness at the moment, you know, or not at the moment, for the last, let's say since 2016, the mood has soured against that. And further from 2020, I would say the Black Lives Matter movement and the Black Square on Instagram and all that. I feel like that might have been the peak of that mode, to be honest. I feel like that is totally gone now for a long time. People are sick of it. So just on the surface, people would sort of chafe at it and reject it anyway. Thirdly, and this is related, the economic situation is so brutal for people. The shopping, people getting their groceries, costs a fortune, it seems like. But yeah, so sorry, I'm looking at the chat again. That groceries cost a fortune, mortgages, rent, especially rent, costs a fortune, and everything else. And people are just effectively like we're not wealthy like we were 10 years ago, let's say, you know, where people were kind of happy enough, more or less. And we just don't have that anymore. It's an impoverished country. Some people are doing okay, but for the most part, it's not good for people, and people don't talk about it. People don't talk about struggling to pay for heating and food and everything else. And of course, you know, let's say in the Celtic Tiger, I always say this, like from the Celtic Tiger up until not too recent or recently enough, you know, housing might have been expensive, let's say in the Celtic Tiger, and even 4 or 5, 6 years ago. But one of the excuses they made was that, well, consumer goods are cheap, including groceries. Little Aldi, Tesco, all this. You can get cheap groceries, you can get cheap this, that, and the other, and yet housing is expensive. But this kind of overall, it's pretty good. Whereas now housing is expensive, groceries are expensive, fuel is expensive, this, that, the other, everything's expensive. So it's kind of like the deal is off. Same with the migration thing, of course. The migration, the pact there was that, well, if you take unlimited migration and destroy the social and cultural fabric of your country, or if you're willing to accept that, then you'll have a relative level of comfort. Well, that's going away too. So because of that economic aspect, people would just be annoyed. You know, they would associate this liberal onslaught, this march through the institutions, we'll say, or whatever, of a liberal agenda, gay marriage, this, that, and the other. People would just say, do you know what? I've had enough of this now. It was all fun and games in 2014, but I'm really sick of it. So even without looking at the substance in itself, people would just automatically feel like pressing the reject button, right? And then you get into the substance, and you know, you can start talking about the degradation of the role of woman, basically or mother in specific, but also the denial of the category of woman, which is extremely unpopular, despite what sort of liberal institutions and activists and all of this say. 95% of people reject the idea that, you know, gender is fluid, and, you know, women, some guy in a beard can show up and and say he's a woman, and blah blah blah. It's like, it's bread and butter stuff. It's almost ridiculous even to be in opposition to it, because it's just like nobody, that is nonsense, and it just annoys people. So the referendum played in referenda. See, it's because we have two. Ordinarily, we have a referendum. That's why I'm getting it wrong. Is because that's how it should be. Usually, you do one referendum at a time. So these referenda, um, yeah, sort of had notes of that. Obviously, the idea of a durable relationship, so a polygamous relationship, or a polycell, or a polycule, or whatever, you name some weird thing, some foreign thing. Neil Richmond mentioned the immigration thing that went around, did the rounds, the idea that it opening up of a durable relationship could open up mass immigration, chain migration, to worse than it already is. So that was all clear for the most part for a long, has been for a long time. And so in my mind, I was just thinking these are an automatic rejection. This is in effect, it's almost like a catharsis for the population, just to get to just reject the shite, you know. And of course, as always, I regret not putting money on it, because and every time my political Nostradamus capacities are pretty good. They're almost perfect, to be honest, in the last decade. And yet I never put money down. It's what I know. This is what I know. I don't know horses. I don't know crypto. I don't know greyhounds. I know politics. I know dissonant politics, and I know how to recognize uh, certain energies that aren't appreciated in the mainstream. This is what we're doing. This is what I'm doing, and you're doing. This is the whole gig that we're at. Is our gig is like recognizing where the majority are at, but it's not allowed by the liberal regime and the media lie, and so it creates this contorted perception and all of that. This is literally what we do, and I don't put my money where my mouth is. And if I did, I could have a pretty good fortune at this point if I were brave enough to do it. But anyway, so yeah, so it was put out there, costing tens of millions, of course, to do this, and then we go through the formality, and alas, yes, it loses in a landslide, or we win in a landslide, you could say. So that was that basically. It won. I read out the BBC bid, won by a vast majority. You know the story, but so to get back to kind of where I was there, the fourth person who I put something up on Twitter, because you get four pictures on Twitter, so I put up four of these women who I thought made very compelling cases against the referenda proposals. Um, it was the last one was, and last but not least, was Leisa De Brun. So I wasn't, to be honest, that au fait with Leisha beforehand. I'd seen her around Twitter here and there, but I don't think I'd ever seen her speak in person, like her face or whatever. I just saw the account on Twitter. She did a segment on Tucker Carlson Uncensored on her Twitter show, and I just thought she was extremely impressive. Her, you know, because I didn't know exactly where she was coming from, I expected less, let's say, because I thought, well, you know, someone a little bit more establishmentarian, let's say, a little bit more mainstream, might get the gig on Tucker through the connections, because, you know, not just anybody ends up on these shows. There's ways and means how someone gets kind of legitimized into it and all of that. So I was thinking, oh, hey, where's she going to come from? This kind of staid, kind of conservative, Buckleyite perspective, that kind of thing. And she didn't. She came straight away out with the idea that this is bad for women. It's a neoliberal capitalist sort of instrument to degrade the family, to degrade mothers, and to effectively you know, this whole thing about doubling the workforce, etc., etc., um, dissolving categories such as the family for the sake of getting more worker bees out. Everybody now is just a commuter, and every kid is in a creche, etc., etc. Uh, so yeah, capitalism, neoliberalism, all not usually what you expect. And I just thought it was very good, and she came across very well. So those four ladies did extremely well, and in my opinion, they come across as legitimate people, impressive people. So that was that. So what do I get on to next? I mean, I've loads of I've been thinking away today about it, or since the result. Um, my takeaway, it's like, is it something, you know, I hope I've covered the background, the events sufficiently. Like, I mean, that's what happened. It is what it is. I could get into probably loads more details and insider baseball on the whole thing, but I mean, that's effectively that. Now, the real question is what to make of it, what to think of all this. You know, on one hand, excuse me, it is I should probably get my mute button if I'm going to, like, semi kind of burp into the microphone. So on one hand, it's obviously a good thing. It's a sign. It's a symbol that this relentless march of liberalism, I suppose we'll call it, of liberalized, very liberal abortion policy, gay marriage, ending blasphemy laws. I want to talk about that actually. Etc., etc., has come to a halt. There's been a sea change, and we are now pushing in a different direction. So I'm going to pause there and talk about the blasphemy thing, by the way. So if I'm not, I hope I'm not imagining that this happened, because that's how sort of irrelevant it was at the time, if indeed it happened at all, which should tell you how irrelevant it was. Was the blasphemy? I'm going to look it up. My keyboard is to my side here, but blasphemy referendum Ireland. That's how bad it is. I have to look it up to see if it even happened. Yep. Okay. So it happened. There you go. That's proof of how ridiculous it is. And I'm a political person. I pay attention to these things. So there was a referendum on the so-called blasphemy law in the Irish Constitution, which was passed, I suppose, in that the article was removed on blasphemy law, which speaks to the ridiculousness of this whole process. Because, of course, the first thing they did after they removed blasphemy law, as you all know, you know what I'm about to say, was start talking about a hate speech bill, which is big on everybody's lips. Elon Musk and everybody talking about it across the global kind of right wing, Western right wing. This draconian hate speech law, where if you have a meme from 5 years ago that was in your Telegram cache that you never even saw anyway, that was slightly deemed inappropriate or something by this hate speech law, you're on the hook, and you have to, instead of like, you have to prove your innocence rather than them prove your guilt, etc., etc. Need I say much more than that? I mean, they remove a blasphemy law that was never, very rarely used. Don't really know the history. Completely irrelevant, completely dormant of an article. Someone asked me what I was drinking earlier. It's whiskey, of course, but I mean, it's hard to know what to say to that. Extremely draconian hate speech law, which, of course, I kind of chafe at people using the term hate speech anyway, because it's just a censorship law. That's all it is. It's not hate speech. By using the phrase, you're sort of granting it. It's just a censorship law for core issues of society. What are the big issues of society in any society, in any place throughout history? The sexes, stuff to do with the sexes, uh, ethnic and racial politics, religious disputes and disagreements and conflict that goes on. This is the stuff of human existence, right? And they're making it so that it's illegal to talk about those things, but of course not universally so, just for certain things. So, for example, the denial of historical events, obviously that's part of it, right? Quite obviously, I can come on here all I want if and when this law is passed. I don't think it's been quite passed yet, but it's on its way. Historical events. I mean, I can't even get into it on YouTube, but clearly I can't. I will be totally free to come on here and debate the Irish famine. Was it a genocide? Wasn't it? What was the extent? What was the intent? What were the means? What were the methods? The who and the why. We could go back and forth. Me and I'm not a historian, but I could get 10 historians on here from radically different perspectives. Some who say no, there was nothing like that at all. It was just a crop failure, and actually not that many people really died. And some other people could say, well, it was an intentional genocide on behalf of the British ruling colonial elite, and la 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 la. Uh, that's never going to come up on that. It's only for one event in particular. Same with the religious thing. You can bash and mock and insult Catholics all you want. You can go into churches and desecrate the churches. You can do all sorts of stuff. But if you do it to a mosque, because Muslims have sort of, let's say, on the ground political capital, and they're favored by the ruling elite and all of this kind of stuff, then so anyway, like a complete blasphemy, like a blasphemy law like you couldn't imagine. And also just in general that you would blaspheme the idea. The other thing too is if you were talking about replacement or migration or the idea of a plan to ethnically cleanse people from our country, Ireland, and all of that. Well, that's conspiracy theory and that's hate, of course. But I mean, that's patently obvious, and yet you could potentially end up on the wrong side of a hate speech infraction there for that. So, like a referendum to remove blasphemy law, and yet, as it happens, you introduce the most draconian blasphemy law in Ireland, probably in hundreds of years, maybe ever, right? Immediately afterwards. So anyway, that's how ridiculous these referenda are. So getting back to this one, uh, women, mothers, durable relationships, all of that, the one that just failed miserably. The central question, is it a great thing or whatever? It's obviously a great thing in terms of what it represents, a sea change. That era of liberal referenda and change is over. The era of unbridled political correctness, the sort of the stuff boomers are, I actually think they're the worst for it, to be honest. And I'm a big boomer basher. Don't take it personally. These are generalizations, but I feel like, and this is an inspiring thought actually, based on the referenda, is that you know the most likely, in my view, anyway, in my life, if I'm going to make a point about, oh, this transgender stuff is crazy, or the migration's out of control, or if I'm going to kind of gently broach this stuff with a normal person in life, having a pint in a pub or whatever, uh, without knowing who I'm talking to, I would much more fancy my odds if it were a 22-year-old than a 62-year-old, which is a big deal for us. And this is a phenomenon that's true across the West, of course, is that it, unlike the idea that, oh, well, I'm a conservative, I'm a nationalist, I'm a this and I'm a that, and it's the old people and it's the dying ideology. That's unfortunate. That's not the case. It's precisely, I think, the opposite. So it's people under the age of probably 50, 45, Gen Xers and down, let's say. And I'm speaking in a general capacity, but I think I would much more fancy my chances with a 22-year-old, a 32-year-old, or even perhaps a 42-year-old than a 60 or a 72-year-old. I feel like if I'm speaking to a 62 or a 72-year-old or older, that I'm getting the RTE line like drip fed into my veins from the boomer, because they're getting it from RTE. They're getting it from Dahi and Mora, and they're getting it from the morning show, the afternoon show, the evening show, the night show, the late night show, one after another, and it's being bet into them. And even the hairdresser, when she's cutting the hair on, like, the afternoon show, and the guy's making an omelet in the corner, and they're talking about, oh geez, these bigots are against transgenderism. It's like fed into them via this kind of like, you're sitting at home watching TV all day, and we're going to act like your friends, and we're going to act like what you can imagine a normal social conversation would be like. And into that, we're going to inject these ideas, and thus you're going to swallow them like, uh, like a pill. So, yeah, boomers in general have an issue with that stuff. So, and I've seen it many times. I'm not just kind of making it up. This is in real life. Whereas, if I'm in a pub and there's a 25-year-old barman and I'm having a pint and I start chatting to the barman, he's doing his thing. I sort of think the odds are above 50% that not only is he a little bit open to what I'm saying, but that he's all the way in, basically. That, like, he's one of the lads in the group chat. He's either hardcore liberal freak, or he's basically all the way over, and I don't really need to tell the guy anything about all these kind of ideas. And the chances are he's on board. So I think, I haven't delved into the stats, but I saw somewhere sort of on the scroll on Twitter that I think younger women were more likely to vote against these uh, referenda proposals than older women. And I can also speak to that. Like a lady up the road from me was mentioned it a few weeks ago. She said, "Oh, I think we've had enough of these bishops and these archbishops and Archbishop McQuaid and la 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 la. They're living in this sort of fictional view of what the 1960s were like still, and that's where their taboos are and their orthodoxies are, and that's their view, is that they're in Song for a Raggy Boy or Angela's Ashes, and they're going to make a radical vote against that sort of orthodoxy, whereas in reality the orthodoxy is completely opposite to that, and it's ridiculous. They don't know about the drag queen story era and this, that, and the other. Dahi and Mora don't tell them about that. So that's one of the big bonuses of this, is that effectively liberal hegemony is over, and let's call it anti-political correctness based, or whatever you want. It's hard to describe what it is because people voted for different reasons, but in general, the era of being against excessive political correctness and against the unbridled dissolution of basic categories of life, that era is over, and the era of pushback has begun. I think that's visible in lots of things. Like, of course, we're in a globalized kind of cultural world now, so young guys. I don't know about women necessarily because I'm not one, but like young lads are listening to, at basic bare minimum, Joe Rogan and that kind of stuff, and like the culture is at bare minimum Joe Rogan. Do you know that kind of thing? So the idea that you can introduce these radical, effectively like transgender or degenderizing concepts to people and that they'll accept it is over. But yeah, someone's telling me to bring on Last Trugale. I would love to, but I'm so out of, well, two reasons. I'm out of step with StreamYard. I couldn't remember how to do it, or maybe I could. But also, okay. Also, I don't know if he's free or not. Yeah, but I mean, I do have a link here ready to send if he's around. Let's just put it that way. I'll keep an eye on the chat. But oh wait, I've gone off camera. So yeah, so that is one view. So that culturally things have changed. For the reasons I mentioned, economic, cultural, media, all of this, that's in our favor. But I suppose the other side, and I might as well get to it. I've been on long enough. Sorry. Is the sort of skeptical view about this. The idea that we dance in the streets, and maybe I could pour a bucket of cold water over people. I feel like that could be relevant as well. And I mean, where do I sort of begin? Like one thing that's relevant is that nothing has improved for anyone. I keep looking at the chat. I have to stop doing that. I have to just go like this and not look. Sorry, but nothing has been gained. So in terms of the relentless flow of migrants into the country against the will of, what is it, 70-80% of people, depending on the poll, effectively everyone in Ireland, that continues as we speak. The power of NGOs and all of that, which again is another part of the conversation at the moment, it continues. So I mean, the economic situation, the cost of shopping, the cost of rent, the cost of everything, which again, all of those things are connected to migration. The general situation has not improved for anybody. No woman, no mother in the home has had an improved situation from this great success. That's kind of a problem in a sense, right? And I don't know, is it too obvious to just put it like this, but the regime brought it to us and we said no. And I suppose you could say put a halt to their advances. I suppose that's a win in a sense. But again, it's like if, say, the state or the regime or whatever you want to call it brings a referendum for 6 months' time, and it says a referendum to introduce mandatory kicking old ladies into the constitution, and We think, how ridiculous is this? This is crazy. What are they doing? And we oppose it, and the vast majority of the public, see the common sense of the situation, reject that in putting that into the constitution. And so on the day we win, we say, brilliant, everybody agreed with us, we did great, wasn't that fantastic? We stopped their crazy onslaught. It's just like, well, how often do we do that sort of? They just tee up these curveballs and we just blast them off into space and we say, "This is brilliant, we won." I mean, in theory, it's more like fetch, like a with a frisbee. Um, yeah, someone said it's not a win, we just didn't lose yet. So that's kind of how I feel. Again, the situation of any mother was not improved. I would be interested to see if someone could bring a court case again, because I have a realistic view of the political situation and how law and politics works. I don't actually believe courts really work or whatever. Uh, but in theory, if someone said, "Well, this article about mothers in the home has been reaffirmed, so it now should be viewed with even more seriousness," shall we take a case to the court and say that, well, the tax policy or this or that or the other is counter to the spirit of that constitutional amendment, or the article in the constitution in the first place? That would be, to me, that would be good if there was some sort of thing where it's like, well, we're going to completely revoke that year 2000 tax individualization. That's gone. This and that's gone. And now, instead of sort of and that's the thing as well, is that it's like women were never forced to be in the home and they were never forced to leave the home. It's all about carrots and sticks. So in matter of fact, in detail, they were never strictly forced, but in reality they kind of were forced. Clearly the economic structure was altered so that it became necessary for women to go to work, even though they might not necessarily have wanted to. Like I say, the year is 1992. The bus driver, he's got a wife. She stays at home. She raises 3 or 4 kids. They have a 3 or 4 bedroom house, and they go on a holiday once in a while, and they don't lack for anything. They have a shed full of tools, and they own plenty stuff, and they're doing well, and they know their neighbors and all of it. A nice, solid, the good life, the decent, humble but good life. Obviously, to do that now would require, you can't just be a bus driver. Also, if if you were a bus driver, you'd have to drive in order to afford the house that you might, unlikely, but possibly be able to afford these days. Well, what are you going to drive an hour and a half into Dublin to drive your bus? And it's preposterous. Whereas, again, in my 1992 example, the guy whistled as he walked around the corner to get to the station, and he lived nearby. So the quality of life and the ability of mothers to raise their own children at home, if they want to, has been taken away from them largely. These days, it is, and this is the funny thing as well, is that the people who are most in a position to be stay-at-home mothers and to breastfeed and everything that comes with that are middle, upper class people who are well-to-do. You could argue hypothetically working class, like, or whatever you call it, like a dole class as well. But I think largely it's the Ranelagh and the Dalkey classes, South Dublin, who can afford to do the wearing the baby and the breastfeeding and the all the ins and outs, all this kind of like luxury luxury ways of raising a kid. Like, and by the way, I agree with all those, and I like to think that my 2 children have been raised, my 2 babies have been raised in that way. We've done what we have to do to make it so. Um, but it's much easier for the very rich to do these things. And I'll give you an analogy, by the way. I hope I'm not bleeding on too hard, but I'll give you an analogy. Just this shocked me uh, maybe a year and a half ago. How old's my boy now? Yeah, slightly more than that. My boy was maybe 6, 7, 8 months old, somewhere there. Like, he was still a baby, And I was in this shop and I was getting something in a deli in a super value, and the woman came up to me behind the counter. She's whatever, she got the roll or whatever it is, and she was cooing at my boy. Oh, he's lovely, la la la. And she said, "I've a boy or a girl or whatever at home. I've a baby that age," and I just broke my heart to hear that, because I'm thinking, But you have a baby boy who's 7 or 8 months old or whatever, and you're standing here making rolls for me, right? This is disgraceful. Like, unless of course, as the feminists suggest, you have a passionate love of making rolls for people like me, right? Uh, then I think something's gone majorly wrong, right? Because you should basically have whatever lifestyle making the rolls for me affords to you right now should be on the table for you while you're at home with your baby. That's what should be available to you. And that's what the article in the Constitution sought in the first place. Now, now that is the preserve, not exclusively, but largely of the yummy mummies of Dalkey and Ranelagh and all of this, getting their eggs Benedict on a Wednesday morning or afternoon, right? Meeting with the girls, not to be sort of class resentful about it, but that is a thing. Ironically, it was South, I don't know the district, South, East, whatever, D4, posh South Dublin, effectively, was the only district in the, or constituency in the entirety of Ireland to reject these referenda, which is kind of ironic. It shows the delusion of the Western, including Irish elite, that they have these notions for the underlings. The underlings, oh, let's liberate the underlings from their chains, the chains of the bishops who have them in chains, or some delusion like this. Meanwhile, they are, like I say, sitting in some fancy cafe on a Wednesday afternoon, breastfeeding their child in a sling, and it's all good. And of course, what are they doing? They've said, "I'm not a stay-at-home mom. I run a business that loses 65 grand a year, and your husband, who's an investment banker, covers it, right?" Don't talk to me about this stuff, right? But that's kind of the class irony and the sort of the pallor of the ruling class in Ireland, how empty I think they are. It speaks to that, in my view. The fact that that was the one district in the entire country, and a complete role reversal. Really, it's not them who will be making chicken fucking rolls for me with their 7-month-old baby at home. That's the issue. So, yeah. So that was that. But what was I on about? Yeah, is it a win? So yeah, it's a win. Like I say, it's not a win in the sense that that status quo will not change. You could argue it was prevented from getting worse, but it won't get any better. At least purely down to this win, electoral win. Someone says it's a start. I'll take the fair enough, right? Any poo-pooing I'm going to do from here, by the way, is based on. I'd like to think that thus far I've sort of explained how, hey, this is a good thing. It's a sign. It's a symbol. It's a bat symbol in the sky. Happy days. It gives us great great gust in our sails. Happy days. Let's go with it. I'm acknowledging all that, and then I'm just saying, but let's take a counter view as well at the same time. That's all I'm doing. But yeah, so yeah, nothing exactly was gained, but further destruction was arguably avoided, and it's a rhetorical, political, moral win for people on the dissident right and the populist right and the conservative right and all of that. So yeah, that was a win, but I don't know. One of the things, and this is where I go into conspiracy theory mode slightly, right? And sort of bitter, and all of these things you could argue that someone could say, oh, the following arguments that I'm going to make could be, oh, you're just being eternally not happy and eternally resentful and committed to being an outsider. All this, I know these kind of arguments, but I'm gonna make my point anyway, which is like, there's a possibility in which this lends itself to a long needed restructuring of the political landscape in Ireland from a regime point of view. And hopefully you don't take that the wrong way. I'm not totally poo-pooing this. Most people involved did great. Like I say, the four ladies I mentioned earlier, many others. But there has long been a need for it. If you look at America, you have Democrats and Republicans, and that's a stable political order. In Britain, you have Tories and Labour, etc. It's been the Western order has long had the idea that a viable and a vibrant center right is an essential condition of any thriving and functioning, or at least functioning, Western capitalist neoliberal sort of regime, IMF, blah blah blah, you name it. So I've always been sort of skeptical and waiting for the shoe to drop a little bit on that. And I feel like there's elements of that with this, where, and again, I'm not going conspiracy theory mode. This is just a good thing. Hey, I don't know. I don't know. But there's an element in my mind to which the regime just didn't seem like they had their hearts in this one. And it was just kind of thrown out there. And if I'm smart enough to say that I felt like it was a bit of piss poor attempt, I think they might have known as well. And again, I'm not trying to say it was all a big setup or whatever, but just as a consequence of it, at the very least, that it presents itself as an opportunity for a authorized right wing, a new form of a right wing in Ireland to consolidate. I've got that feeling, and I've waited for it for a long time, and I've been a critic of the likes of John McGurk and all of that. And by the way, I think he's extremely intelligent and does extremely good work with Gript. I don't claim to know what someone believes, their bad intentions or any of that kind of stuff, but he says himself, even just today, I saw he described himself as a proud Buckleyite, this, that, and the other, and will never change, and that's his view. That fair enough. He's entitled to it. You could add to that Zionist, or at least Zionist advocate, let's say. That whole, we'll call it package. Think of a Republican American, sort of standard Republican American, like, I don't know. I don't want to necessarily say Lindsey Graham or something like that, but just, your general run of the mill Tory Republican, that kind of ideology, the whole package. Like I say, I'm not smearing the guy with that at all, and I think he does great work with Gript, but I'm just saying that that's his view, that's the perspective he comes at things from, and I think someone like him has also probably alluded to in the past the idea that one of his goals was not necessarily, and this is the revolutionary sort of the this kind of in me speaking, of course, is that one of his sort of goals or objectives was to restore sanity to the mainstream, to to show the mainstream its kind of errors, I suppose, and bring light to that through media, which is not an illegitimate goal by any means, but just that's the view. I think the view is, in general, and I'm not speaking about that him and specifically, I'm just expanding to the general argument now, is to restore a little bit of sanity, curb some of the excesses, etc., etc. But by no means sort of try to replace or switch out the traditional and the ordered structure that we have within politics. Um, and that goes for the likes of a Michael McDowell as well. Again, I don't know really much about him, so I'm not going to speak beyond what I know. But there are reasons to believe some of these things. I'm not. I like to think in putting forward this point of view that I'm putting forward the point of view, but I'm not over egging the pudding. I'm not trying to cast a grand conspiracy or the most hostile intentions on other people, or to place those things on people unduly. I think I'm just making, basically, I think I'm making no more of an argument that those people would make for themselves, type of thing. I'm just speaking about it from maybe a critical other perspective, let's say. That's all. I think that's reasonable. So someone like McDowell, the likes of those, there's a skepticism I have towards that stuff for various reasons. One is because I just think things are so bad that to say, let's just curb the most extreme excesses, let's restore a little bit of sanity to the dialogue and adjust the political culture so that it's a bit more evened out. and that the NGOs aren't totally run amok. They're still there, and they're still effectively the same thing is being pursued. And yet the general direction continues. I just think personally, I think things are so bad that that is completely insufficient and is effectively a waste of a limited opportunity and a limited amount of political capital that exists regardless. To put it another way as well is take McDowell, for example, right? Again, he's a political creature. He's been around for a long time. In 2004, he advocated for the ending this birthright citizenship loophole, which I commend massively, and I think he argued very well for that. But on the other hand, of course, he was on records, and this could have been just a rhetorical thing, trying to play moderate. I don't know, but he did say, "Oh well, one of the big reasons to get rid of this birthright citizenship is that if we don't, it'll allow for racism and far right and all this to come in." And I just feel like the amount of political capital that has been raised over these years since 2016 or thereabouts has been hard raised by people, the grassroots, and it's been hard raised effectively by just events, by just the state of the country, to just squander it on sort of a mediocre playing along with the norms and the taboos of the political mainstream as it is, and to say that, well, anything at all outside of a very tinkering around the edges immigration sensible policy or whatever, anything else is far right and everything else is riffraff and everything else needs to be cut off, and let's just leave it at that. I just feel like that is worse than nothing. That's just my view. My view is to reject the idea of this racism and far right and this person is too much and this person said this and this person says that. Those are the kind of attitudes among the right wing. If let's say we all are sort of moderately in the right wing in some fashion, far, less far, this, that, and the other. I just think it's essential for the right wing at large in Ireland, and people know each other very closely in Ireland. That's the advantage we have, is that it's hard for people to cut each other off because, well, you know, we've all met each other, and so it's harder to kind of do that when you really know someone. And yet I do feel like there is, if there's not an operation underway in Ireland, there should be. Put it that way. That's why I'm, let's say, circumspect about the whole thing, is because I'm I'm wary of the idea of becoming this sort of milquetoast Tory esque right wing and sort of consolidating that. I prefer it to be a little bit up in the air. I do want there to be mainstream candidates and all of this stuff, but it's just a big question. It's an open question. That's what I would say as well. Um, but that's just my view, and in a sense, that's what I have to add tonight is mainly that, because we all know what happened in the referendum. It's just that, and it's not to come out and say McDowell and McGurk and all of these different people are this and that. I think like McDowell did great in the 2004 referendum. McGurk does great with Gript, extremely talented as an editor, and with his rhetoric. But and I don't know what their motivations are. For all I know, they're honest to God, whatever, absolutely. But just as a reasonable political critique, my view is that to consolidate, and here's my sort of line. It's some people have more moderate views on certain things. Some people have more radical views on certain things. This is a spectrum. These things occur. My issue is that when certain people, and I'm not just the people aforementioned, but just in general, a tendency to pull up a drawbridge and sort of say, now we've got it, now we've formed, now we've consolidated what the right wing is, what the mainstream populist rejection of the liberal establishment is. It's this now, and that's it. And now we will negotiate the terms directly in a friendly capacity with the regime itself. And those terms will, of course, be sort of extremely milquetoast and insufficient for to meet the radical nature of what we're faced with now. I worry about that. And so my view is just always to, if there's a McDowell, if there's a moderate, if there's a insider a little bit, but they're towing both camps, I'm all for that. I'm not the type of person who says everybody must be a radical. Far from that. It's just that there has to be a burden upon the insider and the moderate, I think, in my view, if everybody wants some form of success, some form of genuine change to this system that we're living in, then there's an onus upon everyone to meet each other somewhere there and to not draw up walls. So I've always said that and there are plenty of them, spurgs within the right wing, who are way out there. They're puritanical about like having the purest, let's say, view of what a right winger should be, and it should be this, and it should be that, and it should be the most controversial thing imaginable, etc., etc. And they just can't appreciate someone from more on the inside taking a different tack. That's bad. It's toxic. The same is true in reverse. And so, I care deeply about how this goes, and to me, the strength is always in a wide movement with a lot of different people in it, and there's no one calling anyone else there's no one, and that's why I was trying to be reasonable in my arguments a while ago, because I don't want to be guilty of what I'm suggesting here. But nobody is calling anybody else a shill or a this or a that or whatever. Like I say, people I mentioned, McGurk, McDowell, etc., the others, like I say, they do great things, and you don't read minds. You don't go around jacketing people as this or that. But I see the strength in people refusing to draw the lines, and that's why I mentioned Jenna London a while ago, is because she is, and this came up in specific, is that she was. It appears online from posting that she was chatting to McDowell. She met him. They must have hit it off or chatted or whatever, and she said he was great because he wasn't too good to talk to her. He didn't shun her for being maybe slightly more radical in a certain sense on the gender stuff. And I think she mentioned being appreciative of that. McDowell's cool, and yet then he was commenting about other people saying, "Well, this is very convoluted, but like he was in a selfie with Gavin Pepper, and then he was sort of denouncing that after the fact subliminally via Jenna, this kind of stuff." And I see that stuff and I go, I don't know what the guy's intentions are. Maybe people have their own views, but just that the introduction of that into a political movement that must rely on a connection between the moderates, the radicals, and everybody else, and the clean sort of dynamic spectrum going on there. That's where the strength lies. And through the process of the people on the further right, always keeping the people on the left right to account. Like you're being too soft, and the tendency of the people on the moderate right is always to err towards the softness because it gets you the inside track. And so there's a dynamic that it's going to fluid and it works. So long as people don't start pulling up drawbridges and acting like this person's riffraff. They were called far right by the Irish Times 7 years ago. I can't be associated with him. He was on live streams, telling the truth or whatever, this kind of stuff. That's always, of course, that's how conservative and right wingism is in the post sort of World War II era has been designed to fail, right? Under that sort of pressure. Someone mentioned Matty McGrath calling out Derek Bly, that kind of stuff. It goes back to Ross Cray. I mean, I could go on here, like I really could. The whole Ross Cray thing was another debacle. I'll take Ross Cray, right? I've spoken about this a bit, but you had the Team Lowry kind of Gombean Mafia, and Shane Lee and James Gleeson, and then Darren Keegan doing the journalism, kind of like basically giving them a platform to say whatever they want, effectively, in my view. Trying to, I don't know why or how they were doing this. It must have come down from Lowry and whatever political machine he has, I would assume. But it was the idea that you're going to, Ross Gray is a, and this is relevant to the broader political conversation as well. Ross Gray is a flashpoint, and basically we do not want the people in this town going off the reservation listening to these so-called far-right people. We don't want them getting influenced. And after what happened in Ross Gray, which was especially bad with the guards, they're obviously this community is ripe for people to say, hey, look, here's what's happening to you. You're being replaced. They have more asylum seekers, so-called, than the rest of Tipperary combined, if I'm not mistaken. I was there myself, and it didn't look good, like, in that sense. And then just another one, then they get physically forced aside by the Gardaí. It doesn't get more explicit and brutal than that. And it's like, just prevent these people from being politicized. And of course, your man Shane Lee was talking about, we're not like the rest of the country turning people away. It's just we don't have services. And he said, there's no agenda here, i.e., there's no agenda. We're not like getting up on a political point against immigration or anything. We're just saying we don't have service. Like, the whole gig was to say, this will not become politicized. The people here will not become radicalized. The people here will not become politically activated and seek, for example, a nationalist candidate, right? And that was in their own interest, because it was either, basically, they had a choice, I suppose. Either we're going to go full nationalist, or we're going to create a like a Chinese Great Firewall. We're going to create a firewall around Roscrea and try to sort of cut outsiders, so-called, off, who will agitate, in their view, in their language, the community, and which would be a political threat to them. It's complicated, right? But of course, the funny thing is like, I made this critique before in a different video, but they never said left wingers aren't welcome. This is not people of Roscrea, but these political Gumbean sort of rulers, mafia bossmen, these Shane Lees and Lowrys. They said, oh, right winger and welcome and all this, but they never said left winger welcome or anybody else isn't welcome. So it's kind of suspicious, right? And sure enough, I met some people in Roscrea who were sort of defensive. Here's one for you, right? I don't know if I've gone off in a total ramble. I feel like this relates to my conversation about the referenda. I met people, and if they ever end up saying this, no offense, I'm not trying to condescend, right? But I met people at a nationalist rally in Dublin a month ago, or whenever it was, the big one in Dublin there at the Custom House Quay. And there were some people with a tip flag, and I went up to them, and they were from Roscrea, and I said to them, Shane Lee said that Roscrea isn't like the rest of the country turning people away, and there's no agenda, and right winger and welcome and all this stuff. And yet here you are. You're at what is objectively a right wing nationalist sort of rally. And he was saying that's got no place in Roscrea, la 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 la. I mean, what do you think of that? And they said they kind of got confused. They couldn't register it, and they were saying Shane Lee's we're not racist. And I said, wait, what are you talking about? I'm not. I mean, look at where we are. Like, I'm not calling you racist. They were just befuddled. The idea that I was challenging their little local political sort of Tammany Hall kind of thing, because they're bought into it. They think they're local, and Lowry is one of the most popular politicians in Ireland, and Tip and all that. That's how this kind of Gumbean patronage kind of stuff works. They're down to the GA club, and they're at all the funerals and la la la. They do the whole thing, and and they know all the big boys. They know. I'll get to it in a second, but they went to sort of a reflexive sort of it wasn't logical. They weren't replying to what I had said. They just went totally into this defense mode about no, he's a local. He's all right. He's all right and stuff like that. I said, I'm not saying if he's all right or not. I'm saying what he said and what he's doing. I'm just telling you like what he's doing. And look, you're here at the nationalist rally. Like, so I mean, am I not getting to something here? And they just kind of almost went catatonic. It's like they didn't know what. It was very strange, to be honest. Shows how strong the political machine is there. Like, I feel like the idea is if you went around Roscrea and you openly said, look, I think Shane Lee, he's a nice guy and all that, but I think in reality we're kind of sold down the river there on that a little bit, and I think we should just have a totally new politician. I think that would blow people's minds there, and I'm not trying to be condescending, but it would be like, no, if you went around talking like that, you'd be ostracized. Like, you've got to be careful, it's almost like a bit of a mafia. I'm not accusing them of being gangsters or mafia. I'm saying that's how people feel about this political order, let's say, in a community. And yeah, I just thought this is amazing. These people are not willing to just say, listen, this guy, it's not about whether you like or not like the guy. And I just thought, I think these people think these Lowrys and that own them. Like, they think that there's an internalized Stockholm syndrome, that they're the bosses in the community because they're the legitimate politicians, as is Matty McGrath and the rest of them. They're the legitimate people. And it's kind of like, well, what makes them legitimate? I mean, they're legitimate because only on the basis that you say they are and you vote for them and stuff like that. If you wanted to, there's never been a better opportunity. You could just say, listen, either Shane Lee and Lowry and all them move hard to the right, and I'm not even talking hard, but just a staunch, clear, unabashed anti-immigration position. No words about it. No calling other people far right. No disavowing. None of that. Just like the two councillors in Galway. And I know I have my critics, right? Joe Blogs or whatever on Twitter. But I'm not against seasoned local politicians because I support the guys in Galway because the guys in Galway came straight at it. That's the thing. I'm not against people who aren't radicals or online streamers or whatever. The Galway guys came at it proper. The others didn't. So anyway, how do I bring this back to the actual purpose of the show or stream here? But you know, sorry, no, I just need to go to the chat here. Someone says something about boomers. I seem to have a boomer comment like stuck on the screen, do I? Give me a sec. I don't know, is that there for you? No, okay. It's just on my StreamYard. But sorry, someone says the guys in Galway, they're like lol. There were two councillors in Galway who stood with the Ross House, the protesters against that, and the General Luke Gerard greater area. They came out and just said, they basically said, they were Fianna Fáil councillors, but they basically said, fuck Fianna Fáil, immigration is out of control in the country. The party and the political establishment are only answerable to these international people. And I don't care what you say, what you do. I don't disavow the people and I don't disavow being thoroughly anti-immigration. Why would I? Look at what the situation we're in, right? Why would I? That wouldn't make no sense. So yeah, fuck you, fuck the media, fuck all of it. And I stand with the people. Sorry to curse here, but and of course the guy ended up getting raided by the guards, la la la. Point being, a local crafty politician, the Gombeen, the whatever, and yet he stood firm and true with the people, has the loyalty of the locals. I'd say they would take a bullet for him, or those two guys at this point. And they got smeared hard by the media, you know, and yet the local, I would say the local electorate would, like I say, take a bullet, never mind vote for them. So the idea that you can be a crafty Gombeen and all this, if you were a really crafty Gombeen, you would play it up, right? And you would, as far as you have the town consolidated for votes, you would get more and more. It would be a fiefdom at that point. So again, if you're talking about just pure realpolitik, crafty Gombinism, just about sheer the votes, the local stuff, then you would go down the route of the Galway councillors. The reason the Ross Gray lads go down their route is some sort of other thing, and that's my critique, right? And I don't think they should get loyalty based on nothing from the people of Ross Gray. Also, recently I saw that there were 60 or 70 people bussed in, for the most part. People went to Ross Cray and did a anti-racism, pro-asylum seekers demo in the town or whatever. Now, unless I'm mistaken, Shane Lee, James Gleeson, Michael Lowry, Matty McGrath, Darren Keegan with his camera and his notebook or whatever, right? I don't think they made any fanfare about, hey, this far left who think that we should have asylum seekers imposed, so-called asylum seekers imposed on us against our will. Those people are very contrary to the general situation in this town. They're not welcome here. Not a word, unless I'm mistaken. Not a word, right? So the position the people of Roscrea are in, and by the way, there's this idea that the far right, so-called, were ran out of Roscrea. That never happened. It's a made-up sort of idea. But the idea that the political operators created a successful firewall in Roscrea, we'll say, the idea there being that, oh well, we the political gombeans will take care of it, get these agitators, get these ruffians out of here, get them out of town and we'll take care of it. Well, what you had was the guards blew everyone out of the way. The encampment outside has gone to virtually nothing. The whole town is absolutely full of foreigners and pretty more soon in this racket hole. And not only that, it's one thing to be treated like that, but the political situation didn't change. The same Gombeans who were the political cadre in Roscrea are still the same guys. And you have far left NGO activists running around the place, unencumbered, and the town is just completely defeated. So the idea that, oh yeah, we'll go along with the Gombeans and we'll say let's not engage in any politics or whatever, Well, good luck where that gets you. And that's kind of speaks to a greater point in terms of mass politics. So the idea that you come out of these referenda and you say, and I don't want to cast aspersions on Lowry, or not Lowry, McDowell, these kind of people, and let's get on to Willie O'D. Willie O'D came out today, let me find it, just with some vague tweet about like, oh, the NGOs have gone too far, the woke agenda has gone too far, this kind of stuff. And it just, it reminds me of just the broader question at the moment, which is that I'll just see if any of you are still watching or interested. Okay, sort of. Thank you for staying with me. But the idea that it's basically this question, and people have come at me with this. It's a hot question in the Irish right populist space at the moment, I think, or at least I want it to be, which is that if some mainstream Gombean erstwhile or hitherto Gombean politician sort of suddenly drops the hammer that, hey, I'm against all these crazy wokes as well, last minute, or not only last minute but after the fact, and it's lukewarm, and they have a history of being just completely corrupt effectively, and they'll say anything and will never do anything, and they're politicians in the sense of, some of my critics like to say, oh, they know the magic of politics and all this kind of stuff. But it's like, yeah, they might be crafty in terms of how, like, I don't know, getting a road here or that kind of stuff. But it's like, well, yeah, they know the patronage game, I suppose, to some point, but more often than not, they have completely lied and don't give a shite about any of it, and are completely unscrupulous about the whole thing and have no concept of sort of honesty at all, right? And that's, I mean, I don't think I'm stating anything. Some people would kind of roll their eyes. It's like, are we talking about the same world here? I mean, everyone knows this. Like, I mean, just say the words Willie O'D to someone in Ireland, they'll go, oh yeah, that's like a synonym for a corrupt fucking politician who you couldn't trust with anything, I don't think I'm being out of line to kind of say that. And yeah, so there's this kind of debate that, well, if we can get those guys to say what we're saying, and we can get Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael or whatever it is to lean a certain way, at least on paper, with a very milquetoast tweet, right? Not policy, not proposed referendums, or not just proposed, but actual referendum, none of that kind of stuff, but just a referenda, but like a tweet here and there, an idle, and not even a hardcore comment, but just a comment that's the most idle, milquetoast, sort of unimpeachable from any perspective, vague statement. The idea that you get that and you just fall at the feet and you go, salvation has arrived. I balk at that. That doesn't make sense to me. And again, I'm on record with people who know me as I'm against the whole thing. You spurg out, nothing's ever good enough, this kind of stuff. I'm against that. I think that's reasonable. Sometimes you have to play ball, and I know play the game and all that, but only to a point, right? There's a point where you go, well, we've just won this massive referendum, we've kicked the door in effectively. Is the first thing we're going to do with that buoyancy, that political capital, say Willie O'D has arrived to save us, or are we going to say no, Willie O'D, you're going to have to try a lot harder than that? What did he say? So Willie O'D said, Fianna Fáil needs to get back to basics and abandon the hate speech bill, etc. Focus on housing, health, law and order. What could be more generic than that? Roads, and stop playing to the woke gallery. The woke gallery. Okay, start listening to the people. Stop talking down to them, and start listening, or stop listening to the out of touch Greens and NGOs. Right? And again, hey, I'll take it as better than no tweet. Like, I mean, fair play. Keep it up. Maybe do more. Keep going. Keep lifting it up a little bit, and we'll start. I mean, you'll get credit where it's due, as in proportion, I would say. But I mean, a totally milquetoast tweet like that after we've absolutely kicked the door in of the liberal hegemony in Ireland, and to say that let's all rush to kiss Willie O'D's Gombean shoes, right, loafers. I mean, some people disagree, but someone says the based boomer comment is still on screen. Oh, I do not know how to get rid of that, lads. Hide current comment. Gone. Okay. But it's funny because if I had any decent clippable portions of this that someone could clip and post or whatever, it's just ruined by that. Anyway, life goes on. But thanks for reminding me there. But yeah, the idea that you just trip over yourself because the latest got mean. I put up a tweet online earlier on Twitter. I just thought it was kind of it was at the point where I was like, all I can do is satirize this. I mean, I can't debate this with people. It's just like, how do you debate? How can I debate this in any seriousness? I mean, we could go back and forth on like disagreeing on definitions and perspectives and go to get it totally into the weeds and just fundamentally disagree or whatever. Or I can just like go for the satire and just call it what it is, basically. Which was, I said, uh, I'll just find the tweet, right? Um, Not to congratulate myself too hard here, but I thought it was good. I said, if this referendum tells us anything, it's that Ireland needs a major and sincere political change in the form of Michael Lowry, Bertie Ahern, Willie O'D, and Charlie Flanagan. Like, really, is that what you're going to take from your revolutionary moment, your massive sea change, to say, here's who's going to rescue the situation for us? And Bertie Ahern, no, he wasn't named specifically, but Charlie Flanagan, not too long ago, was brought up as pushing back against the woke agenda and saying that censorship has gone too far and this, that, and the other. And I put, I brought the receipts to Twitter. Is that like must only be like 3 years previously, he was Minister for Justice calling for a hate speech bill for people who say, and he specifically referred to people who are worried about too many people coming into the country. He was saying the hate speech bill would specifically, in his view, refer to that. Just something to say, too many people coming into the country for him would constitute necessary hate speech bills, which ultimately means prosecution or imprisonment. The guy a few years later tries to launder himself through right-wing populist new media as some sort of a champion of the based masses or whatever. What? Like, and people say no, but hey, take it where you can get it and all that. And I don't know, is it just the sort of, I've always been defiant or like that with things, like in all ways in my own life, as my tendency, but I don't think it's a pathological issue on my behalf to kind of say, well, wait, there's 5 million people in the country or whatever. I mean, why, like, of all the people who you're going to go to be against woke stuff and hate speech bills and NGOs, why would you go to the the biggest, no, advocate is too small a word. I can't even find the words for this. The guy who was the actual minister, the guy who was the leading politician, not just advocating but implementing and pushing forward censorship, wokeness, anti so-called hate speech stuff, mass migration. He was behind the original plantations, let's say, of like 2017, 18, 19, 20, in my days when I was covering all that. He was literally the minister for justice. He was my nemesis as far as I was concerned for that time. The idea that within 3-4 years he could just pop up and say woke's gone slightly too far, and you say, well, we need him because he's a big deal or something. My sense is just like, well, why is he a big, I mean, what makes him a big deal more than any of you here watching? I don't quite get it. Someone says, oh, well, he's got the bona fides of being in the political establishment. It's like, isn't that against him? Isn't the whole point is that we've had a sea change? Our country is absolutely destroyed. The political establishment at the core of it, these corrupt yes men, go along to get along guys, and corrupt, the cartoon definition of corrupt politicians and elites. I mean, surely out of 5 million people, if you're going to bring in the based character as a response to this referendum, it's like, my point is that if I were ordering the 5 million people in a line to say, okay, you're first, you're last, you're in the middle, those are the people I would put dead last out of 5 million. I'm not exaggerating. So how on earth do they end up at the front of the line? I just don't understand that. And some people say, oh, well, Garrod, you're not getting it. You don't appreciate the nuance and the savviness of political operators. Now we need to blah, 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 blah. I'm sorry. I just have to just reject it out of hand. It's preposterous. Sometimes an argument is so, and of course, I must temper what I'm saying here as well. Is that to say, and I said this earlier on Twitter myself, which is that if a politician who I deem corrupt, gone being whatever, completely countered what they say they are, only like last year or whatever, even that person, if they make a comment that's generally in our direction, I'll give it, like I said, proportional credit. Hey, you've had a change of heart, you allege. It's milk toast, so it's not even exactly much, but it doesn't mean anything. You're not committed to anything. You're just making an idle, sideways comment. You've nothing to lose. You've nothing to really. You have put no stake in it. You're not suggesting that you're going to achieve anything or throw yourself out in the line to achieve it, or it's just idle commentary, and you just say, well, because it's me saying it, it should matter somehow, right? Because it's some insider, which is meant to be the very ethos we should be rejecting, surely at this point. But yeah, if someone's, I'll give that proportional credit. I'll say, okay, well, hey, obviously I'm skeptical because of your background, but I will appreciate the esteem I suppose you sort of have within these circles that I'm not fond of. But so yeah, okay, cool. I mean, keep saying it. I mean, keep saying it for a long time and say more and keep at it. And you've no demonstrated history talking about this. I'm reasonable. I'll forego that. I'll say I'm open. I'm open to carry on, but I'm not kissing anyone's shoes here, and I'm not giving you any more credit than I'm giving to a guy I've just picked up on IFP candidate in Carrick-on-Suir, I think, down Tipway, Martin Murphy, and there's Amanda Gallagher in Sligo. There's this, that, the other. Like I said, Jenna London, she's not a candidate, but she's real deal. I'll give credit. If I've got shoe kissing capacity in me, it's going their way, right? People who've demonstrated a little bit to varying extents. I'll give you another example. Gerard Crowell, I think is his name. Like, he's another one who is sort of laundered in, whether intentionally or not or whatever. But either way, he made his way into the anti-woke credentials in the last year by pushing back against all this crazy transgender stuff. Some stuff, like, I don't know the details, right? But basically that I'm the guy, right? He kind of garnered that clout. And I was just shocked. And of course, I saw he was this kind of pro NATO sort of person. I thought pro NATO, affiliated to the kind of McGurk sort of world a little bit. Okay, I'm already a little bit a senator already. Who gets to be a senator in this, in this climate, without being sort of in there a little bit, being, again, I wouldn't write anyone who's a senator off, but I'm just saying, if you're inside in the castle, sort of, there has to be at least a bit of, hey, you're going to need to really demonstrate your credentials here a little bit. Anyway, he comes out and he makes the most milquetoast. This gender stuff has gone a bit too far. I'm talking the most milquetoast stuff, but in this day and age, it's a rare morsel. So naturally, and me included, I'd say, oh, okay, well, that's good. We need people saying that, and people in the mainstream and political insiders. Okay, well, that carries a certain weight to it, and we must sort of, in a certain sense, give you some credit, I suppose, because then the argument goes that we encourage more of that, because otherwise, why, if we're going to bite people's hands off, then why would anybody move in our direction? So the argument goes. And I go, okay, well, all that's true, so fair enough. But then I realized that the guy, only not too maybe a year, a couple of years, something like that, previously to that, had signed the gender recognition bill, basically the transgender, let's dissolve the concept of gender bill, in the Shannon. And I thought, well, what? Like, as in, if the guy wants to say, hey, I made a mistake, I shouldn't have signed that, which is, by the way, that's a bit rich, no? Like, I signed it, I'm sorry. It's like, okay, well, like, there's contrition, but I mean, there'd be a bit of that's a lot of contrition you'd need there. Like, whereas so my issue is like, okay, so you're going to come out and give one milquetoast comment, and suddenly you're launched into the limelight as the anti-transgender woke craziness guy. I just feel like there's a imbalance there. It's like, yeah, there's redemption and there's contrition, and fair enough, you made a mistake, and then there's the extent to which you are catapulted out there as this leading right wing, uh, the new populist hero. I just feel like the proportions are off there, right? It's like you signed it. Like, I don't know, am I going crazy talking about this? But it's like I compare it to someone like Jenna London. Again, has been out for, as far as I can see, years now. And of course, the two aren't mutually exclusive. Don't accuse me of that. But she's been out there for years independently, right? She's not, as far as I know, a political insider or any of that kind of stuff. She's just a sort of a, almost like, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but kind of like a Facebook mom type, right? That's a compliment, to be honest. Uh, kind of like a Facebook mom, sort of blossoming into this political force, this entity. She's almost now like like a brand name, I think, at this point, the likes of a lot of other people these days. But like, I would consider the leading voice among a few others in the pushback against radical transgender ideology, gender ideology, and pushing it on children. All that leading voice has been up and down the country, libraries, the whole issue, campaigning, flyers, hardcore work ethic, positive attitude, day in day out, right, demonstrating it. So basically, if she were to become the icon of that movement in Ireland and the one who gets a lot of kudos for pushing back on it, that makes total sense. I mean, totally, it should be synonymous, her and that movement. Um, and just, so you go, okay, so she's been out there for years, and then this other guy, not too long ago, signed the bill which dissolves the concept of gender effectively. And you're going to tell me that they can both just be, in fact, not just both be put out there, but probably him a little bit more. Why? Because he's a senator. It's because I just don't, it doesn't, that doesn't strike me as right at all. And so, the idea that potentially someone like him gets pushed as a candidate, or I don't think, I keep mentioning Janet, but I don't think she wants to be a candidate. But let's say just broadening it out a bit, the idea of someone who has spent years at an issue, has demonstrated a solid commitment to it, unabashed, whether it's a question of immigration or gender ideology, has been a long-term campaigner when it wasn't easy, when it wasn't necessarily advantageous or any of that. And they're not an insider. They've not been around forever. And that's who I want to run for politician. That's who I want to. All this political capital that's been built up, that's launched this big referendum that were referenda where we've won, and the tide has changed in Ireland. Well, yeah, let's use our political capital as Twitter users and this, that, and the other, and whatever. Let's all row in and say, I'm sorry, Willie O'D. Good on you for making the comment, but you go over there for a second. I'm focused on Michael Murphy here. I'm focused on Amanda Gallagher. I'm focused on Derek Bly. I'm focused on other people. I forgot some. There's someone in specific I wanted to name. I can't name them now, but because I forgot the name. But there are good, solid ones, and they're not lunatics or any of that kind of stuff. They're perfectly estimable people, and I just don't see why you wouldn't place the proportions accordingly. Willie O'D, you made a good comment. Fair play to you, Willie O'D. Make more. God bless you. And then you go, okay, now let's back to the issue, back to the candidate, the legitimate candidate, and just any other view than that, to my mind, is insane, and is, I don't want to say it's questionable or suspicious. I don't want to go down that road, but it makes no logical sense whatsoever to me. I don't know what more is there to say, and that's the question going forward, is to, like I say, is all this, and who am I to, like, whatever. I don't have the clout to tell people what to do or what to believe or what to pursue, but what I will just give my point of view, is that all of this political capital cannot be squandered on saying, oh my God, Bertie Ahern said immigration, we need a more sensible immigration policy. Look, stop. Just stop. No, 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 no. If go support Derek Bly. If you don't like Derek Bly, or if he said something before, fine. There's another one. There's more and more and more and more. I think I wish my vision as of someone like Derek Bly, with his work ethic, commitment, integrity, the whole lot, inside in the Dáil or a councillor or the MVP, anything. I mean, that's the kind of the way. That's where they start assassinating, right? That's true politics. And even the pursuit, even if you get close, you run the election, someone like Derek gets close, not quite all the way there, but they a lot better than they did last time. Well, then the gun beans are going to have to give us more and say more and maybe even perhaps do more. So, like I said on Twitter earlier, it's a win-win, in the sense that, you win either way by supporting genuine people and not just kissing like Willie O'D's fucking toes. That's just my view, but yeah, there's a lot more. I mean, the idea of Ireland as a geopolitical chess piece in the broader context. I've views on these. I've like, you know, they're my own. Like, they're not evidenced fully. They're just perceptions I have and feelings I have about Ireland and the greater geopolitical chessboard in as regards to Russia and that. The idea that they would want to cool off on the crazy lefty stuff and introduce a bit more of a balanced political order here. The idea also again, I don't want to say it's just one of these. This is where I'm going into sort of like, this isn't my official position. I'm just spitballing. Um, that with the Israel Palestine stuff, that the American empire might not quite be happy because they're famously very Zionist. Might not be very happy with the Irish anti-Zionist sentiment, and a lot of that sentiment, even I agree with it, but it's wrapped up in, for obvious reasons, it's because it's seen as a lefty thing. It's wrapped up in the NGO structure and has kind of gotten, not only is it a big, powerful political force in Ireland, anti-Zionism among grassroots, but it's sort of gained institutional power by being melded in with the NGO structure, sort of thing. So it ends up inadvertently having state support, and that's, I sometimes wonder. And again, I'm not quite the whole. There's an anti-NGO buzz going on at the moment. Brilliant. All I'm just saying is, I'm adding richness to the gravy. I'm just saying, here's a counter view on that, and so we'll all enjoy the anti-NGO party. For years, I've wanted it, and even if Willie O'D is against NGOs, great. I'll take it for what it's worth. I'm just saying, it's interesting to be aware of maybe some broader context, so that we might be aware that, well, it's good for us, but there's a confluence of factors going on here, and who is using who in certain contexts. It's worth at least being aware of it. So yeah, the idea that the Zio American sort of State Department would, via its connections in Ireland, would decide to rein in the NGOs selectively, because of course they're never all going to be reined in, and the migration stuff might not necessarily be reined in at the end of the day, or the transgender stuff. But what they might do is rip back some of these anti-Zionist forces. The idea that state money is finding its way to this anti-Zionism, a bit effectively state-funded anti-Zionism within Ireland. So yeah, Israel lobby, like I say, and it's, of course, the Israel lobby, famously well known. I needn't, name the names, but the Israel lobby has famously got some loyal friends of Israel in Ireland, situated in just the right place where you might want them to push back against this stuff, with the cloak and the allyship of a genuine anti-migration right-wing force against what is loosely seen as the anti-Zionist left-wing force, and creates a nice little dynamic there. That's one thing. The other thing, as well, is, and again, I'm anti-capitalist effectively. I mean, I support businesses and all that stuff, but just mass, like, capitalism, international finance, and all that kind of stuff. I've always believed that mass migration, is sort of like the lungs of a capitalist order, whereby labor is seen as this thing that's on tap and off tap, which is the critique we have of mass immigration generally. It's that the capitalist powers that be, and the banking systems and all of that, can effectively introduce these demographics to lower, as central banks said it themselves in Ireland, and more migrants needed to keep wages down, wages down, cost of rent and all of these things up, of debt and all of that. It basically squeezes people and extracts more value. Uh, it's a sort of an exchange of labor for capital and all of that. But and it gives more power to the capitalist class, the capital owning class, basically. So if you own 10 gaffs and you own a load of businesses, if you bring in 1 million migrants, it in every facet benefits you. You get cheaper wages. The rent for the houses you put out is higher, so it's great for you. And of course that applies manyfold for these international finance bundles of like 10,000 properties. They own like if you own a portfolio of 1,000 properties in Ireland, or you're a shareholder of a portfolio, that goes manyfold. So I've always believed that, yeah, as much as immigration are the lungs of sort of capitalism, in that sense, that you increase mass immigration when you want it for certain ends. Well, the other side of it is that when you want to pull the plug, when you want to kind of recede a little bit, recession, or when you want to adjust the flow a little bit, basically that's the key tap. And just so much as it can be turned on, it can be sort of turned off a little bit as well. So I've always, and again, I might sound like totally out in the weeds, and I know I will have my critics talking like this. I'm just shooting the breeze here. For the most part, I'm happy with everything. It's a great time. Everybody's good, right? But um, but I do believe that I've always felt like for years, and I've been involved in the anti-mass immigration plantation movement. I felt like there may come a time where they might want to wind it back in. And of course, nationalism, as John Mearsheimer has described, the most powerful force on earth, in a certain context, when it's powerless versus the power of the regime, can end up getting used in a certain sense, where they can, via their Gombian politicians and their sort of right wing institutions that they can fund up and power up, as they can turn the dials on all these things kind of as they please. Um, they could say, well, let's wind back the migration now, because, and here's another belief I have, is that uh, much like really the economic boom in the mid 2000s, this is all centers around like, just like they brought in 150,000 Polish people every year or whatever. Now it's different, but you bring in all these migrants. The one reason they feared us and anti-immigration activists is that if somehow you politically were to pull the plug on immigration 2 years ago, it would have completely destroyed the plans of the capital owning class, the banks and the major landlords, developers, and all that. It wouldn't be right. So basically, it was the one tool in which you could undermine the whole thing. If, let's say, somehow you took government and you stopped immigration, everything would fall apart, especially for them. Um, so why it's imperative that that's why when you come out and you say, I think we should stop immigration, there are forces lined up to just destroy your life instantly out of nowhere. And it's shocking, right? But they don't come from nowhere. And yet that might be the case for if you're against immigration. But when the time comes, of course, because these economies are cyclical, they're all about boom bust. And when the bust happens, the same capital owning class are there ready to rake it in as well. Because, of course, they've built up and squirreled away the capital, they have foreknowledge, and they buy up all the cheap stuff. Just look at your NAMAs and whatever. Um, so one of the key tools of that would be, well, if we, let's say, just wind back immigration, not permanently, not ideologically, just we'll just let the dogs go a little bit, on the nationalism side of things, and just wind it back a little bit, and that'll be the precipitating factor in a recession. At which point we'll jump in and buy everything up. By the same token, before the far lefties kind of clip that and say, I've admitted this, that, and the other, I believe that, of course, to a much greater extent, the far left and the open borders, to a far greater extent, are used when appropriate, which is most of the time, to just completely rip the gates down and just bring everybody in and put foreigners on UBI, living in Cahersiveen or in a military barracks and whatever. I mean, the whole structure, the whole nature of the political and economic order is based around that. And I just feel like nationalism and conservatism and all this, for various reasons, like I said, the Zionism, the capitalist impulse or imperative, and there was another one as well. I've forgotten what it was. The perhaps in some relation to the in some relation to the broader geopolitical context in Europe with Russia, although that's kind of more questionable, I suppose. But Yeah, why, there could be an argument for a sort of a balancing of the political order. Anyway, look, that's all a bit highfalutin and or maybe lowfalutin, but or you know, um, just rambling. But yeah, I hope I haven't left anything out. I'll just check my notes. I just kind of wanted to ramble. Yeah, so I think I'll leave it there, lads. It's nearly 12 o'clock. I've been on for it's. I've been on for a while, too long, I'd say. So anyway, I'm happy to do more streams like this as events unfold. Just one more thing to wrap it up as well. Of course, I don't mean to sound blackpilling. Everything's a conspiracy theory. Poo-poo everything. No politician is good enough. Everything is a capitalist scam. La la la. No, the fact is that we have had a great moment. It is massive. I was in the doldrums in 2016, 17 in as a person who believes the things I believe now, basic conservative, populist, nationalist principles as they're construed today. I had those views way back when, and it was a nightmare. I've spoken about this many times. Meeting people with aliases in pubs, at the back of dark pubs, and crazy stuff like that. And if you showed up with 5 people to like have a meeting and you announced it publicly, you'd have like a bunch of black masked Antifa state funded who would come and like probably beat you half to death, and the guards would just look the other way. These were all realities that we had to contend with. So the idea that we're at this point, we're mainstreamed, like I say, even though there's a bit of gatekeeping goes on here and there, for the most part there's a fluidity in the Irish right where there's people who are fairly, I used to be seen as sort of far out there, like I say, back in those days, because that was the context. Whereas now I can rub shoulders with the majority of people like in this movement, and there's a nice dynamic there. And the country is so small that the Irish people, even as we're made a minority and we're squeezed and we have all this kind of pressure on us and political or weakness compared to the money sort of power, we do all sort of know each other, and there's a richness that gets built in there and a strength there as well. And I think that was sort of evident. There's been a lot of progress made. In one sense, you could say this was just a poll; it didn't mean anything. But I mean, polls mean something too. When the Irish Times or some newspaper came out and said 70-80% of people are against mass immigration in Ireland, effectively, that didn't mean nothing. That was a big deal. There was no substantive result from it, but it was a big deal and it meant a lot. And it was a sign of things that have gone on thus far and things that are to come. And the same goes for this. So, it's a good thing, but then there's more to think about as well. That's all I'm saying. So excuse me. So happy days. And yeah, look, I'll leave it there. I will do more streams because I think the setup hopefully works okay. Thanks for everybody commenting, and I suppose I'll catch you on the next one. See you.